Morels 101 by Sarah Holger, interpretive naturalist at Whitewater State Park. To conserve the natural resources within our state parks, various rules have been put in place. Among these are rules that determine what people can take from parks. Fruits, nuts, berries, and mushrooms are available for people to remove from the park, but they may only be taken for personal consumption. It is illegal to take those wild edibles from a state park and sell them on the market. As we learn about morel mushrooms, it's worth noting the nutritional benefits of mushrooms. Mushrooms are made 80 to 90% of water. They're very low in fat, low in calories. They're a rich source of fiber. They contain many vital minerals and vitamins such as potassium, copper, phosphorus, zinc, and magnesium. They're an excellent source of polysaccharides, which are complex carbohydrates that strengthen the immune system. They activate the release of the enzyme aromatase, which is used by the body to produce estrogen and reduces risk of breast cancer. Mushrooms release steroid-like molecules, triterpenes, that restrict histamine release and help in anti-inflammation. There are edible varieties that are also a rich source of niacin, vitamin D, riboflavin, and selenium, and in protein content, usually around 25 to 30% by dry weight. Vegetarians can meet their daily protein requirement by including mushrooms in their regular dietary regime. Of course, they are cholesterol-free food. Mushrooms have a very interesting life cycle. First off, a mushroom is the reproductive structure produced by some fungi, not all fungi. There are millions of microscopic spores which form in the gills or pores underneath the mushroom's cap. The spores blow away into the wind or are spread by other means such as animals feeding. If they land on a suitable substrate, such as wood or soil, the spores will germinate to form a network of microscopic rooting threads, which are called mycelium, and they penetrate into the new food source. Mycelium grow into or around the food source. They secrete enzymes that digest the food externally, and the mycelium then absorbs the digested nutrients. This illustration depicts the life cycle of a mushroom. It's interesting to note that there are about 250,000 to 500,000 spores per mushroom. Now, mushrooms don't just pop up all over the place. They live most of their life cycle underground until they can sense that their food source is being depleted. So a specific mushroom tends to have a specific host plant that it desires. For example, with morels, as we'll discuss further in future slides, tend to prefer elm trees. If the mycelium of a morel species is growing near an elm tree that has died, within a year or two, the mycelium is going to detect that that host source, the nutrient value, is depleting. And that's when the mushroom rises up and is able to shoot those spores and send out those spores to a new food source somewhere else in the forest. It can take about 5 years for a mushroom to grow from spore. There are over 200,000 known species of mushrooms in the world. In North America, there are around 10,000 species. They say there are between 25 and 30 edible species of mushrooms, and approximately 40 of them that can make you sick or kill you. Many others out there are non-palatable. There are some very easy to identify edible mushrooms, which we show in this slide here. Hen of the woods, the giant puffball, oyster gills, chicken of the woods, and the morel mushroom. As previously mentioned, different species of mushrooms tend to have specific desirable host species that they tend to grow near. So this chart shows a few examples. If you look around ash trees, you're likely to find the ash tree bolete. Near elms, aspens, oaks, and apples is where we tend to find morels. Oak trees, we can also find beefsteak polypores. Within our hardwood forests is where we find the chanterelles. If you look in pastures, woods, and lawns, you can find puffballs. Another mushroom species that likes oak trees or hen of the woods, as well as honey mushrooms. If you look around stumps, trunks, and logs of dead or dying deciduous trees, you can find pale chicken of the woods. If you look along roadsides and in lawns and disturbed areas, you may find shaggy manes. Once again, around stumps, trunks, and logs of dead or dying deciduous trees, you may find sulfur-colored chicken of the woods. On stumps and logs of deciduous trees, you may find turkey tail. And once again, around those oak trees, you may find witch's butter. There are various species of morels that you can find around the world. We're going to focus on the 3 common species that we find in Minnesota. And what's perhaps so exciting about hunting for morel mushrooms is it's a very tiny window, a very limited season, between 4 and 5 weeks in the spring when you can actually find these mushrooms. The first morels that we tend to find, the earliest ones that come up, are known as black morels. They oftentimes grow as individuals, and they come up usually the first week of the season. Exposure to the air and sun makes their colors darken. As the season of the black morels comes to an end, we start to see the white morels popping up. Some folks also call them gray morels, as their color can range from white to yellow and gray. Once again, they come up towards the end of the black season. They have a higher moisture content, and they tend to dry out quickly in the sun. And oftentimes they grow in clusters. Usually the last morels we find in the season are the giant morels. They're typically 6 to 8 inches tall, but there have been some recorded up to 18 inches tall. They like higher temperatures, more humidity, and oftentimes they're associated with forest fires. These 3 species of morels, the black morel, the white morel, and the giant morel, have several traits in common. Their top is completely connected to the stem. They have a deeply pitted cap, which is where they get the name the sponge mushroom. Some people call them a sponge mushroom. Some people say they look like a brain because of those pitted holes. They also have hollow stems. If you cut any of these 3 types of morels in half, you'll see the stem is completely hollow. False morels are a mushroom you want to watch out for. Some people have gotten sick, and there's been some claims that people have even died from eating false morel mushrooms. They are extremely different than the true morels, and the next slide will explain how they look different. Two obvious differences with false morel is that the stem goes all the way up to the tippity top of the mushroom. There's no separation from the cap and the stem. There's a cottony, kind of fibrous substance inside the stem, so it's not hollow. It's got kind of this webbing inside of it. So when is it time to go out and look for morels? We know it's in the spring, but some different things going on with the temperature can help determine when it's going to be good morel picking time. First of all, if it's been a wet, warm spring, that's a good indicator there's going to be some morel mushrooms. You want to have days when the temperatures are between 55 and 60 degrees, and then at nighttime the temperatures go into the 40s. There's some phenological things you can look for in nature that are indicators that morel mushrooms might be up. They say when the lilacs are blooming, and also when the oak leaves are the size of a mouse's ear, or when the fiddleheads on the ferns are up. In the upper left-hand corner, the photo shows a picture of oak leaves that are the size of a mouse's ear. Upper right, we've got lilacs that are just starting to open up. Bottom right, we've got those fiddleheads on the ferns. And the bottom left is something called bedstraw or cleavers. And they say when the bedstraw is up, that's another indicator that morel mushrooms are up. So where do we look? Where do we go to find morel mushrooms? Well, around here, we always talk about the elm trees. And elm trees have a very distinguishable kind of shape to them. I describe it as a broomstick. You want to find elm trees that have been dead for a couple years and the bark is just starting to slough off, just starting to slide off of the tree. If you come to an elm tree where there's no bark on it, it's too late. There's no nutrients there, and most likely the morel mushrooms are long gone from that area. So if we look at these pictures here, the picture on the right shows some elm trees where the bark is just sloughing off and should have some morel mushrooms growing around the base of it. This next slide shows the silhouette of an elm tree on the left-hand side. Once again, has sort of that broomstick, witch's broomstick shape to it. And then on the right-hand side, we have a silhouette of a maple tree up in the upper right, and then an oak tree on the lower right. So you can see very different silhouette, different shape. And once you get familiar with morel mushroom hunting, you become very good at finding and identifying the right kind of elm trees in the right stage. The morel mushrooms can grow right up close to the base of the tree, or they may be out 30 or 40 feet from the base of the tree. Remember, they're coming off of the root system of that tree, so they can be quite a distance from the actual host plant. Of course, elm trees aren't the only host species for morel mushrooms. People find them around apple trees, oak trees, aspens, cottonwoods, sometimes even pine trees. But if you can find an elm tree that's at that right stage where it's been dead a couple years, the bark is sloughing off, you're almost guaranteed to find morels. Some places you can look, besides public lands, and public lands are great, they're open and accessible for everybody, but they tend to get hit harder. A lot of people are out there real early each day, typically, trying to find mushrooms. So if you have access to private land where you're not going to encounter anybody else looking for mushrooms, you're more likely to find some. Apple orchards are great places to look for morel mushrooms, not only around the trees, but along the fence lines and fence rows. Cow pastures can also be great locations to find morel mushrooms. If you can get to an area where there's been a prescribed fire, especially a fire the fall before, that way there's black soil that's darkened from the fire that attracts the sun's heat early in the spring, and that can be a great location to find morel mushrooms. Also, if you can get to areas that have been logged, logging trails, skid trails, oftentimes there's some impact on the root systems of the trees along those trails, and so you tend to see morels will grow up along those areas. So what are we looking for? We've found our spot, we found some good host trees, good locations, and now we're trying to find morels. What are we looking for? Well, this picture gives you an idea of how elusive these little mushrooms are. They blend in so well. It can be really, really difficult to find them until your eye becomes trained. Once you find a few of them, your eye gets trained, and you can kind of hone in on them faster. But here in this picture, you can see this little mushroom hiding underneath a log near looks like some May-apples or Virginia creeper that's coming up. Very tricky to spot if that circle was not around that mushroom. Here's another example. We've got morel mushrooms blending in with the grass, the drying and dead grass from the year before. And they blend in well with the leaves and the shadows on the forest floor, so it can be very, very tricky to spot them. The mushroom in this photo is definitely blended in with the leaves in the background on this slope. So it's really important to crouch down, get close to the ground, go slow, move gently, and we'll talk some more about that when we talk about the ethics of collecting wild edibles. Kids tend to be really good at finding these because they're just naturally lower to the ground, and I think they have better eyesight. You don't need fancy gear or equipment for collecting morel mushrooms, and that's probably what makes this sport so appealing to so many different people. You just need some basic supplies. So as you see in this picture there, it's really good to have a high rubber boot. You're going to be encountering prickly things growing in the forest, and usually in the springtime it's a little muddy out there. So having a high rubber boot's a good idea. You want to be wearing some gloves because you will be digging in through gooseberries and nettles and other stinging things. Some sort of a basket or a mesh bag to put your mushrooms in. You want to avoid using like a plastic shopping bag because the mushrooms will get really damp in there and start to get slimy and mushy. So even a paper grocery bag is better. But we'll talk about in a minute here why a mesh bag or a basket is even better. Some sort of a snipping tool. You can either use a little snippers, or you can just use a pocket knife, and we'll go over that, why that's important in a minute here too. So here's some examples of mesh bags. So you can use an onion bag or an orange bag that you would get when you buy that produce from the grocery store. They also sell these online, Spore Boy and some different companies. What's really nice about these mesh bags, not only do they allow the mushrooms to breathe and so they don't get all slimy in a plastic bag, but as you're walking along out there collecting the mushrooms, you're helping to spread the spores. So the spores are dropping and being released. So you're potentially helping repopulate the morels throughout the forest as you go along. Besides these types of bags or a basket, some other things to have on hand, a GPS or at least a compass. I've talked with many mushroom gatherers who have gotten lost in the forest because their nose is to the ground, they're looking down the whole time, and it's really easy to get disoriented. Insect repellent is a great idea. When we go out, we are in wood tick territory, and that's the time of year when the little no-see-ums or little biting flies are starting to hatch along the rivers down here. So insect repellent is a great idea. A hat, a head net even, to protect you from some of those insects. A water bottle and snacks are a great idea because along the way you are going to get thirsty and probably get some munchies. It's really important that we consider the ethics of collecting wild edibles and that we try to remain as ethical as possible when we're out there doing that, regardless if it's mushrooms or wild raspberries or wild plums or what have you. The popularity of mushrooming is causing resource destruction. And, if the resource destruction, if the impacts on the resources become, too intense, rules can change. And they can make it illegal to collect wild edibles from public lands. So we need to remember that. We want to be respectful of other species, plants, animals, the soil, the geology, all that. Because this time of year we're going to be going off the trails to find these mushrooms. It's really nice if you have a stick, a walking stick or some sort of stick that you can use to gently lift up grasses and other plants when you're looking for morel mushrooms. And that way too you can stay on the trail more and not have to go as far off trail in your hunting. The future of mushroom hunting in state parks is being threatened by those who carelessly tromp through the forests. And these are just some more examples of, over-harvesting, resource impacts. And within our state parks, we do really encourage people to try to stay on the trails as much as possible. Spring is a beautiful time of year, and remember, we're out there looking for mushrooms, but other species are actively breeding and rearing their young at this time of year. So remember to be respectful of those creatures as well. We mentioned having a pocket knife or some sort of snippers with. When you do find a morel mushroom, you want to cut it at the base, right near the soil. You don't want to pull it out by the roots because that root system will continue to regenerate mushrooms for many years yet. And if we pull it out by the roots, we basically destroy that mushroom. We don't want to overconsume. We don't want to take too many. We want to leave some for others, especially on public lands. Within our state parks, when you collect fruits, nuts, berries, and mushrooms, you can only collect for personal consumption. So that means, take a small bucket or two for your family, leave the rest for others. The lower picture on the right there is a picture of wild leeks. Once upon a time in Minnesota state parks, people could collect wild leeks. They were finding people were filling their trunks full of wild leeks and selling them. And that really impacted the wild leek population. Today it is illegal to take wild leeks from a Minnesota state park. So as I mentioned previously, the rules can change if the resources are impacted heavily. It is illegal in the state of Minnesota to sell wild mushrooms of any species if you are not a certified licensed mushroom collector. There's actually a course you can take through the University of Minnesota Extension Service to become a certified mushroom collector. And then you can sell those mushrooms at farmers markets, to restaurants, where have you. But technically it is against the law unless you have that license. Some other potential hazards that we want to consider when we're going to go out there and hunt for morel mushrooms. Some of the different plants you might encounter. This time of year in the spring, you'll see the gooseberries have those nice big thorns on them. The stinging nettles are starting to come up. The picture in the lower right corner is actually me. On one of my first morel mushroom hunting trips, I was so excited. I was right down in there on my hands and knees, and I got my sleeves rolled up, and you can see my arm is up against a stinging nettle plant. So I had some interesting rashes later that day. So we want to wear long sleeves, long pants to protect us from those potential poking or stinging plants. But also we've got wood ticks we need to be thinking about, especially the deer tick that transmits Lyme's disease. And research has been done in our region down here in southeast Minnesota, and it was like 60% of the deer ticks that were captured and examined were carrying either Lyme's disease or the other diseases or infections that can be transmitted by deer ticks. So it's really important you take proper precautions. Wear long pants, wear long socks, tuck your pants into those socks, spray down with insect repellent. After you're done morel mushroom hunting, check yourself thoroughly, wash your clothes, take a shower, take all necessary precautions. We also want to be aware of invasive species and how we tend to spread those species, especially various plants that might be out there along the trail that came from another country. They're not native to our area, and they're very prolific. They spread through prolific seed sets, and a lot of times when we're hiking and moving, we accidentally spread those seeds. So we want to check ourselves good before we head out on a trail, making sure we're not carrying seeds on us. And the picture in the left here shows how there's some burdock stuck to this gentleman's shoes, and you want to check and pull those things off before you head out on a trail. Put them in a garbage can. Actually check before you even leave home. When you're done hiking, check again to make sure you're not bringing things from an area and moving them to a new location. Wipe down your pants, make sure there's no seeds clinging to your pants. If you're using a walking stick, even checking the end of the walking stick, checking your equipment. If you have a dog with you, checking your dog, brushing off all the seeds off your dog. You'll see these kiosks that say wipe your feet, as pictured in the upper right and lower right corners. Those are showing up more and more in our state parks, state forest lands, to kind of encourage people to wipe their feet off. There's usually a boot brush on these kiosks where you can brush off your shoes, and just checking yourself good to make sure you're not transporting invasive species. Some tips for avoiding getting food poisoning from mushrooms, which can happen. First piece of advice, go with a veteran mushroom picker. When you're first learning, you want to go out there with somebody who knows 150% what they're picking. They say to always cook mushrooms before you eat them, because that can help kind of dispel the toxins in them. If you've never tried that type of mushroom before, for example with morels, if you've never tasted them before, when you first start eating them, just sample a small piece. And then if a few hours go by, or maybe even a day goes by and you don't get sick from that, then you can have a little bit more. But what happens, oftentimes people overindulge, they overeat, and then they get sick. You don't want to mix different species together, so eat one species of mushroom separate from other species. And once again, don't overeat, which I can attest to. I had a plate full of morels that I cooked in butter, and I had never been sick from morel mushrooms before, but I ended up throwing up later that night because I just overindulged, I overate. They say if you're out there picking mushrooms and you come across one that just you don't quite know, you're not 100% sure about it, when in doubt, throw it out. Don't risk it. So to prepare morel mushrooms, the most important thing is to wash them thoroughly. And when we do programs here at Whitewater State Park, we soak the mushrooms in cold water and we rinse them multiple times, rinse them out to wash out all the spores, the slugs, all that stuff. So we want to wash them really good. And there's a number of ways you can cook them. Our preferred method is to put some butter in the pan and get those mushrooms cut up, usually cut them in half, throw them into the butter, and we cook them until the butter, the liquid, turns clear, and they are tasty. You can also dip them in butter and cook them on the grill, which is delicious because then they get a little crunchy texture on the outside. You can throw them into soups and hot dishes and all sorts of different dishes. Then you can string them up, hang them in a dark place. Do not put them in a sunny window. Hang them in a dark location and let them dry out. And then you can put them into jars, and they will last in jars in the cupboard for years. You can use a food dehydrator as well, and once again, jar them up when you're done. Remember that if you're drying the mushrooms, it takes about 8 pounds of fresh mushrooms to get 1 pound of dry mushrooms. And then later when you want to cook with them, you can put them back in water and let them soak for at least 30 minutes to kind of rehydrate them, and then you can throw them into different dishes, different recipes. Some people choose to just put them right in the freezer. Bag them up and throw them in the freezer, and then when you want to cook a dish, you pull out that bag and thaw them out and put them into whatever dish you're cooking. Morel mushroom hunting is a very welcome sign of spring. It's an excellent, excellent pastime for all ages, young and old, and it really gives you an opportunity to get out there and enjoy the natural world. So even if you don't find any morels, enjoy the adventure. Stop, look around, notice the flowers that are starting to bloom, the fiddleheads that are starting to open up, the wildlife that is returning and moving around you. Just enjoy the adventure. There is a neat website out there that has a morel progression sighting map. And the website is listed on this slide. And it's interesting, you can click on it, and you can click on it each day. They try to update it where morels have been seen. And so you can watch the map progression over the weeks as morels start to show up down south, and they start showing up further north, and eventually, yay, they're showing up in southeast Minnesota. So that's a neat website to refer to. And you can also check the Minnesota Mycological Society. That's a group right here in the Twin Cities that does a lot of programming and field trips and special events to help people get excited about our fungus in Minnesota. So that's a resource that you can also look into.